floor is yours.
Okay, good. Yeah, so this paper is still a work in progress, and I think things will change to the final version. It's a joint paper with one of my PhD students who won't be on the market this year, not next year, but the year after. But he's super good, this guy. Okay, so this was probably a bit like one of those projects I took on, and then like after you worked half a year on it, I thought, oh, why on earth did I ever do this? Because it turned out to be a huge amount of work, much more work than we had anticipated. But essentially what we wanted to try and answer was like a very simple question. There's all this discussion about market power. All kinds of stuff is being discussed about changes in market power. So during this recent inflationary episode we had, like some camps, they were blaming inflation dynamics on increased market power. Of course, there's been a discussion going on for some years about what explains the decline in labor share, and that this may be due to increasing firm market power. Other people have blamed increase in output market power blame that for declining investment rates. Inequality, same thing, that increased market power has led to declining wages and increasing profits. There's a literature on business dynamism, sort of come to the same conclusion. And of course, underlying all of this, lots of discussion about how we regulate the big business, and especially in the tech sector. And the thing about like macroeconomics, market power, that plays a big role in lots of stuff we do. Maybe not so much what we've seen today. I mean, it is sort of in some of it, like in the standard New Keynesian model, there, of course, what drives sort of one reason why that sort of ticks with the data is that it sort of implies counter-cyclical markups, and market power is important for that. And there's also yeah, and of course there's a huge literature on growth where market power is a big thing too. So if you look out there, what's the state of the literature or the empirics on this? So there is an existing macroeconometric literature that looked at the cyclical properties of markups, but sort of has reached different conclusions. Papers by Bills and Ramey, other people. So some of those papers have argued in favor of counter-cyclical markups, other ones that basically acyclical. So it's a bit unclear there. What about the rise in market power? So this is, of course, the very famous paper by Jan de Locker, Jan Eckhout, and Unger, where they showed that markups have been rising since the 1980s, quite substantially in the US, and they have extensions to other countries and showing it. But there are other papers around that...
Yeah, stop me if I'm wrong, but in the trade literature, there might be more evidence about some markup.
Yeah, and I mean, there's lots of I/O literature on this stuff as well, but that tends to be very specialized products or markets. But even that the Locker, Eckhout, and Unger paper, so there are other people using very similar data that sort of finds more moderate increases in market power. But the thing is that if you look at all of that literature, there's basically, I would say, there's not a single paper around that provides any estimates of the causal effects of changes in market power. So even if it was the case that we all agreed upon market power increased a lot, the extent to which the increase in market power is accounting for the other stuff, that is still unknown. I mean, that's perhaps not so strange because it's like super hard. So you might think, so here is where I think we often have to use theory when things are super hard. Think about like what happened with inflation or COVID. The theory was super helpful thinking about this stuff we hadn't seen in the data. But here, when we think about theory, I think theory doesn't speak with one voice on this question either, because for markups can change for many reasons. Maybe technological stuff, trade. if you have monopolistic markets, income distribution may also be important here. And often in many models, actually, there's a sort of there's a battle between market power and misallocation often going on. So it's not so clear. So the very modest aim of this paper is to try and provide a bit of evidence on it. Okay. And the key idea of the paper is to try and use antitrust investigations or rulings as an instrument for changes in market power. And I'll come back to what is the idea around that. But if you go to antitrust regulation, and so this is from the website of the Department of Justice, is that the goal of antitrust is to protect economic freedom and opportunity by promoting free and fair competition in the marketplace. And so that's what we'll try and exploit. The way this is done in practice in the US is that antitrust is implemented through investigations of mergers and acquisitions, criminal cases, and civil non-merger cases. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and argue that these two subsets here, that you can sort of relate them to exogenous changes in market power. Mergers and acquisitions more difficult because when you have a merger between two firms, you could always think there's productivity effects and the monopoly effects of them. Okay, so that's what we're going to try and do, and I'm going to try and motivate why we do it this way and show you some results from it. Okay, so I'll try and motivate a little bit why I'm going the way I'm going, and then I'll go through what we do and what we have at this point here. As I say, this is still a work in progress. So actually, we worked like, I think this point 16 months just on the data, and we're not quite there, but we're getting very, very close now. And then we'll give out a data set that other people can use that I hope will be super useful.
Write the paper first.
Yeah. No, the data set is not going to be out before the paper is written for sure.
Because you study market power that you
No, that's right. Yeah. I have to exploit that. I have to exploit that 1 minute of market power first. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's okay.
That's okay.
Okay, so let me motivate a little bit first. What I'm going to do, this partly motivated by stuff I'll say a bit later, but I just want to fix ideas of what is going on in the background. So think of like a nested CES example. Some aggregate output, the CES aggregate, or some industry output. The industry outputs are the VJs. And then the industry output itself is some CES aggregate of individual firms' output. And the difference between an industry and up here is that goods are closer substitutes within an industry than across industries. Okay, so there's a bread industry and whatever.
This is Ake Summerson.
Huh?
This is Ake Summerson.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. I actually have a paper a little bit before them about this stuff too, that I then dumped for a reason I should never have done, but yeah. But yeah, nested CES, and suppose that, so there are firms in this market, and they have some constant marginal cost that is drawn from some distribution F. And assume there's some common fixed cost of production D, then an industry equilibrium is very easy to describe. So the price that firm I charges in market J is some markup over the marginal cost. Here's just definition of your market share. So that's your sales share out of the total sales in that market. And then if you have no competition, the equilibrium markup depends on your market share, and then depends on the elasticities of substitution within and across. At Bertrand, it's very similar, slightly different definition of the markup. And then the equilibrium would then be that you have entry until the point where if one more firm entered, then it would not make up for the fixed cost. Okay, so here let me just show this just for one simulation of what model of this here generates. So here I've just taken like an example where the elasticity within is 6 and the elasticity across the industries is 2. And then I'm plotting, so this here, I'm drawing from this marginal cost distribution here. And this is distribution of firms in the equilibrium, depending on whether we are Bertrand and Cournot. So one point here is just to, first of all, Bertrand and Cournot in this case here, they're very similar. That's because there's duality. When this elasticity here rises, then they start becoming different. But for moderate elasticities within and across, Bertrand and Cournot look very similar. So that's one thing. The other thing is that here you can see you got quite, like even in equilibrium, you got these relatively low productive firms that still produce a lot of output here. And if you could redistribute towards these guys down here, that would kind of be good in a sense, because you get the high productivity guys, so the low marginal cost guys producing more. So in equilibrium, in the industry equilibrium here, you get quite a lot of low productive firms surviving. So if these guys up here, they could sort of price out those guys down there somehow, that might actually be good for society, and then we just like tax their profits.
What is the potential distribution?
So that's the marginal cost distribution I'm drawing from. So what I basically have, I have this model here, and there's the distribution of these here. That's from some exponential distribution to get the right tails. And then I'm just simulating this like 1 million times.
Then you renormalize, there are some firms going out that are kicked out of the market.
Yeah, so here basically what I do in each draw, I just like rank the firms from the best to the worst. That is on some combination of your demand scale and on your marginal cost. And then you see, go from the first to the best, and then you see where you cut it off. Then you could have like turnover on top of that, yeah. Okay. Okay, so one thing I want to make clear here. So suppose I plotted market share, and the only difference across firms were the marginal cost differences. And I then plot market shares. So they all have the same demand scale, but they differ in who has high marginal cost and who has low marginal cost. Then if I look at the equilibrium and I cross-plot the price against the market share, that's a nice declining function. Because basically those with a high market share are those with the sell at a low price. That has to be the case from the demand functions. Whereas if instead what differed across firms was the demand scale, maybe I love Coke and I hate Pepsi, and I have many firms that sort of differ in how much I love them, but they have the same marginal cost, then the firms with a high market share are also selling at high prices. But in both cases, whether I have one or the other, it's sort of, there's a monotonic relationship between the price and the market share. Of course, if I have both differences in marginal cost and prices across firms, I just get a cloud.
Those features are made with calibration example, the parameter value that you...
Yeah, this is just simulating what this would look like. I'll come back to why I'm showing you this here. That might be slightly mysterious why I'm showing you, but I'll come back to it in a couple of minutes. Or imagine like I had this here, and now I start mixing many different markets together. So I look at some data, and I'm mixing the market for trousers with the shirts and saying that's all closed, but maybe those are separate markets. If I do that, I get a picture like this here. So market shares against the price, and it starts to become non-monotonic out here, it starts to become increasing out here, and that's because this is for Cournot case. What goes on here? So suppose I have a market where I have one really productive guy and some low productive guys. There, the really productive guy can actually sell at a high price, relative to another market in which there's less difference between firms. So I might have a market down here where marginal cost differences are not so big, and another one that's like here and here and here. And this sort of becomes an opera. I get a non-monotonic relationship here. Okay, just remember, mixing our markets, or if markets differ both in marginal cost and these demand scales, I get this non-monotonic relationships. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit why I showed you that. So if you go and look at this new literature that looks at measurements of markups, What this literature does is that it sort of adopts the whole idea of trying to estimate markups using production functions. So to explain what happens here, so this here is from a great paper by Jan de Locker and Wasinski and the AER. So suppose I have some production function. There's a function Q of inputs of some variable factors and some predetermined factors, and then some unobserved productivity, omega IT. I could have IID productivity shocks to this here that sort of realized after you choose these here as well. That doesn't matter. Okay, so macro IO is literature where they estimate markups. Basically what they do is that they use this whole way of doing that. And the starting point is that suppose I have a firm, I'm not saying anything about goods market competition or anything, but I'm just saying about the input choices. And they choose, there's some variable inputs here that are functions of the productivity, and there are some predetermined inputs, K here. So think of it that labor and capital or intermediate inputs and capital or whatever. Then let the firm now, for the input choice, is just minimize cost, so the Lagrangian of the cost minimization problem. Out of that, I get a standard first order condition. So for one of these variable inputs, the price of the input has to be equal to the Lagrange multiplier, so that's the marginal cost times the marginal productivity. And there, if I now define price over marginal cost as the markup, then I can now express the markup as the ratio of two things. One is theta x, and theta x, that's the output elasticity with respect to the variable input, and then divided by alpha, and alpha is the spending on this flexible input relative to sales. And if I have firm level data, the spending here is something I can observe. So then if I want to measure the markup, all I need is this elasticity of output to the variable input. Okay, that was basically, that's from the old Hall paper. What this newer literature does is that it puts in a lot of muscle power in trying to estimate this thing here. And what is done here is basically to adopt the methods that have been developed in IO by Olli and Peeks, Levinson, Petrin, Jan de Locker, and a number of papers. A famous paper is ACF, Aggregate, Caves, and Fraser. And then there's a very recent JP paper by Gandhi and company. But the general idea is that you use control functions with some timing assumptions. Basically, what you do is that you back out the unobserved productivity from the input choices. And you can do this, you can allow for measurement there, unanticipated technology shocks. You can allow for flexible functional specifications technology like translog. Typically, what you need to introduce is some scalar unobservability. So there's one, you can only have one omega, so you couldn't have like two components of that, for example. Some monotonicity, and then you need a Markovian law of motion of the omega. But given, if you're willing to pay that cost, then the econometrics of this is like really beautiful. I mean, those are fantastic papers. Okay, so then I could go back. Now I haven't measured the markup. But of course, this is still just a measurement. It's not, it doesn't say anything about causality. But there's another problem here, and that is that typically here, you have firm level data, but that has revenues and things like that. It doesn't actually have quantities. So, so that's a bit of an issue. I want to estimate the elasticity of the production of socks to the input of labor. But I have only revenue across firms. So what is done at this point here in the IO literature, or in literature trying to estimate production functions, is that often you go to CompuStat data, and I have these firm level data, but I don't have the quantities. So what do you do? Well, you deflate with the industry price indicator. That, of course, doesn't make sense if I want to estimate the markup, because that would be assuming competition in the output market. So what is done, for example, in the Locker Eckhout Company, is that they adopt a version of an estimator from the Locker, Goldberg, Candelwall, and Popnik. That's an econometric paper. They show that you can actually estimate production functions for multi-product firms and no restrictions on output competition, but you need to observe prices. Again, you want to do this on firm level data, maybe Compstat data, you don't have prices. So, so what do they end up doing? They end up controlling for the market share. And then if you assume that the price of an individual good is a monotonic function of your market share, then it's like having had the output price that you're looking for. Then you can do the conversion into quantities, and then you can estimate production function parameter, then you have a markup. But remember, that requires either that you have only cost differences across firms or these demand scale factors. If you have a mix, then that is not monotonic. Or you mix markets, it's not monotonic.
Mixed market, if you're locally it's still well behaved. So
locally, you could still be okay, but I mean, if the minute I have any of these demand shocks or mixing of the two, this becomes almost impossible. So it's really hard to kind of actually use this, these estimates out there. And even if you could, they would be non-causal. Okay, so I want to go a different way. But you could say, well, listen, why don't you just forget about it? Do the simplest possible thing you can do. So follow, for example, what Valerie Ramey has done. So Valerie, she has some papers where she tries to estimate the cyclical variations in the labor share. And she uses the BLS labor share. So the inverse of the labor share in the standard model, where labor is the variable factor, would be related to the markup. So let's just run a VAR, put the labor share, and I put a bunch of controls. So here I put government spending, GDP, consumption, employment, federal funds rate, and prices. And let me just estimate this on US data. And let me order the labor share either first or last here, and then just, if I use the recursive ordering, see what would happen if I shock it. That would be the easiest thing. After all, if that gives me the same answer, no matter how I order it, then I would probably know the answer to the question.
Why do you put public spending?
Huh?
Why do you put public spending?
That's just because you could think of this as demand shocks. So you want to control for demand shocks. You want to clean up for that. You want to control for monetary policy shock, whatever.
But then, given that your view that technology is not what you are looking for in this markup.
No, so here the idea is that you run the VAR, these are vector of observables, and then I say either ordering first or last, whatever is the residual left is the structural shock to the market power.
Yeah, I understand. But
So I need to clean up for as much as I can. Yeah.
I mean, you just argued, I think, convincingly that it really matters if there's demand or supply shocks, right?
Yeah.
You could add the oil price.
You could add the oil price. You could add other stuff there. Yeah.
I mean, the oil price seems like you should.
Yeah.
If you're controlling for demand shocks, and you want to
Yeah.
make a source of supply shocks as well.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so let me just show you. So this here is when I order the labor share last. So basically, all the contemporaneous values of the other things I cleaned up for in the shock to the labor share. And then I look at the rise in the labor share. So this would be what I would think of as decline in market power, something that reduces the markup. If you do that, then you would say that a lower market power, so a decline in the markup, that stimulates output, stimulates consumption, employment, hard to get anything.
how many bags do you have in your
Oh, here I've got 4, but yeah, this is fairly constant. Then, surprisingly, You also find here that the reduced market power, that's actually inflationary. Seems to be some response of monetary policy. But anyway, that's what you would get.
It's contrary to greedy inflation story.
Yeah, so that would sort of be the contrary of that. Yeah. Okay, so that's what you would get there. This is that ordering it first. So same experiment, a decline in market power. Now that's actually recessionary. It still does the wrong thing to inflation, but sort of employment, consumption, GDP, it works the other way. So I would say that I don't know. This doesn't tell me because like depending on whatever assumption I make there, I get different results. So, and I don't know which one of those two would be the right one. So how do you go about this? Either you need some instrument or you need to go fully structural. Fully structural would be to write down like a Atkinson-Bernstein model, put in lots of structural shocks and try and estimate that using firm level data, which would be extremely interesting if somebody was to do it, but also very demanding. So I'm going to try and find an instrument instead. I'm going to try and find an instrument that I can argue is related to market power and not related to technology or to other stuff. And that's where I'm going to use the antitrust investigations. So the paper, what it contains is, once it's written up, is first of all a narrative of U.S. antitrust investigations since 1965. So in the U.S., the goal of antitrust is to promote economic competition through enforcing, providing guidance on antitrust laws and principles, and is enforced by two authorities. One is the Antitrust Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. That's been there since 1933. And the other one is the Bureau of Competition of Federal Trade Commission. The FTC has been there since 1914. If you actually look, it's kind of interesting, like, we're obsessed with monetary policy and macroeconomics. And one reason, of course, is that we think we've got a bunch of, all these economists working for the Federal Reserve, and these are institutions that had a lot of brain power. If you look at the ATR and the FTC, there's really a lot of highly qualified people sitting there. So there's hundreds of lawyers and PhD economists working for these guys, who are all like, most of them are IO experts, but there are all kinds of computer science guys and actually some macroeconomists too. What guides this here are three pieces of regulation: the Sherman Act of 1890, Clayton Act of 1914, and then something called the Hart-Scott-Rodino Antitrust Improvement Act of 1976. Sherman Act, that's a central piece. That's is legislation against anti-competitive behavior and monopolization of markets. Clayton Act, this is what FTC takes care of, is price discrimination, mergers, overlapping boards of directors. And then Hart-Scott-Rodino is that since the 80s, if subject to some thresholds, if you want to merge or you acquire another company, if the operation is too big, you need approval of that before you go ahead. Okay, so how is this enforced? Well, DOJ, they can prosecute firms and individuals. They can file criminal lawsuits. And here, if you get convicted, actually, you can go to prison, big fines, and so on. You can DOJ can instigate civil action. You can seek court orders that forbid future violations. You can require perpetrators to take steps to remedy past violations. FTC, they can also seek voluntary compliance, and they can file a complaint or instigate litigation. So that's what happens in practice. Okay, so what we do is that we collect data from the websites and from something called the Trade Regulation Reporter. The total history of investigations of the FTC and the DOJ since 1965. So this is more than 5,000. I think it's going to be, once we're done, more like 7,000 individual firms that have been investigated here. And every time they raise an investigation, then we record when they did it, who are the firms that are prosecuted, why were they prosecuted, what had they done, where did they go to court, etc. And then, so we're going to be concentrating on firms that are listed on the US stock market. And for those firms, we also go in and we check something called 10K and 10Q filings. So if you're listed on a stock market in the US, every year you need to submit something called a 10K. 10K says something about the company and threats to the company. So if you thought that something was going to happen to you, you have to say it there. So suppose Gianluca runs this company. He knows that next month DOJ are going to go after him. He has to say it. If he doesn't say it, then that's like the end of the world of that company. You get sued to. Yeah. So they need to do this once a year, and then every quarter they have the updates on this. And if something dramatic happens, they actually have to do something in between here. So these company reports will say if you knew anything was coming along. Then we check, so we have this case filing date, then go in and check for these companies. Did they know in advance? And for FTC, sometimes they know, so then we use that date. For DOJ, they never know. We haven't found any cases where you knew or there was any information around DOJ was going to come after that. So this is like one of what the case looks like. So this is from the DOJ, US versus Joseph Cottigan et al. Here are those that are involved in the case. This non-merger case, bid rigging, says the market, industry code, etc. So what we did is that we want to relate these to firms that are listed on the stock market. So when then all of these cases, checked all of these company names, which one of them were listed on the stock market, and that's an enormous amount of work. Because there is no, so we basically need to go and check company records, like was the Max Fish plumbing company, was that listed on the stock market in June 1970? Like, probably not, no. And then there's a long description of the case where we pick out information from that. Okay.
Can you automate that a bit? Or
yeah, so part of this is automated, part of it is not automated. So what we automated is like downloading all of this data here. Automated going in and check this here, but then we need to check manually after that. So so we have textual search algorithms that are doing part of the job for us, but not without manual labor. Okay, so what are we going to use? Why are we going to do this here? So we're going to think about this antitrust investigation as a change as an instrument for changes in market power. And basically what this is an instrument for, suppose you have this company and you've been doing something against your competitors to increase your market power against the consumers. Then antitrust authority comes after you. At that point, you have to give that up. So that is like an instrument for a change in the markup. Of course, you've been doing something bad, so it's not completely random that this happens. But still, when it gets found out, there must be that should be an instrument for market power. It's not related to productivity. That's why we can't use mergers and acquisitions, because there might be productivity effects. But here, that should be instrument for, I can sort of use this as an instrument for changes in market power that are related to this one component that I'm looking for, where you're sort of exploiting the fact that you might be a big player in the market.
Morten, I guess it depends a lot on the size of the firms, right? So
yeah.
If you have large firms,
yeah.
the market power is going to increase, right?
Okay, so I'll come to that now actually. Let me just think about, if I go back to my oligopoly model, and suppose that in that model, I allow you to do something anti-competitive. For example, I could reduce my competitor's demand. That would be like an exclusivity deal. Or I could try and increase their marginal cost. This actually, both of this is stuff you see all the time in these antitrust investigations. So let me allow a firm to do this, and now suppose that the DOJ, they find out and they come after you. Okay, so I want to show first that this gives me something I can use as an instrument. I also want to think about what goes on there. Yeah, so you thought about this like oligopoly model, and now I thought that somehow, like I'm one firm in here, and I can do something to harm my competitors. I could try and either increase their marginal cost or to reduce their demand scale. Okay, so first of all, you could ask, so like who has the incentive to do that? Like if I think of distribution of firms. So that's what I'm plotting here. So who are the firms that there's the most incentive to misbehave? Are it small firms or big firms? And it's the big firms. So this here looks, what I have there is deciles at the firm size distribution, and then the gain you would get from cheating, basically to try and screw up your competitors. And it's the big firms that have that.
So what is the experiment here?
So here I'm allowing one firm to try either reduce the demand of the firms that is competing against it in its own industry, or to increase the marginal cost of the other firms. There's the kind of two typical things you see in many of these antitrust exclusivity deals.
Okay, yeah,
And then I asked, like, across the firm size distribution, who are the guys who have an incentive? Who stands to gain the most from this? And it's the big firms.
The same data that you simulated and that you showed.
Yeah, so this there's just like simulations drawing from the marginal cost distribution
Same data.
and drawing from the demand scale. And then having an industry, then I ask, how much would you gain if now you could sort of increase the marginal cost or lower the demand of the other firms?
So these in the model are the low marginal cost firms, or not necessarily? It could be the high demand firm.
It could be the high demand or the low marginal cost guys.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's the firms that sell a lot that has an incentive to do this. Why? Okay, why is that the case? It's very, like, if you think about the Bertrand case where you have high substitutability, there the big firms are basically exploiting the low cost, low demand firms to set a high markup. And so if I'm a low cost guy or a high cost guy or I have low demand, I can't really do much to the productive guys. But the productive guys, they can really harm you if they can do something to the bad guys, because then they can just increase their margin. So these IO models, they have a very strong prediction that the firms that you would expect to misbehave are the big firms. Okay, and here I look at, this is for the Kono case, like suppose now you've been misbehaving, DOJ knocks on your door, you get taken to court and you have to give this up. As a function of the market share of the leader, what happens with the profits once you get found out? These are for the guy that was misbehaving, and now I'm assuming that the guy who's misbehaving is the bigger firm. And this is what happens with the profits of the competitors. So once you get found out, you have a big drop here, you have a drop in the profits of the leaders, and you have an increase in the profits of the competitors, because you have to give up this thing. This is like the day you have a knock on the door. This is in the long run, so this is allowing for entry over there. That's the difference between the two. But in both cases, in the short run, long run, the expected profits of the firm that gets prosecuted would go down, and of its competitors would go up. So this gives me the idea of having an instrument now. So here I'm plotting, so let me just fix eyes on the left-hand side, the change in the leader's profits after you got found out, and the impact on the markup. And here I'm looking at the cost-weighted markup. In red is Bertrand, and blue is Kono. And the more the profits of the leader falls, the bigger is the decline in the markup after you get taken to court by DOJ. So this tells me that if I have a measure of the horizontal scale here, okay, 1st of March, DOJ goes after you. If I can now estimate the expected change in your profits, that should be an instrument a valid instrument for the markup. I can do the same with competitors too. I could also look at the competitors. But basically, if I can estimate what is on the horizontal scale, I get an instrument for the markup. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and estimate the impact on expected profits of you get taken to court, both on you, the firm that was violating antitrust law, and on its competitors. And that's why we look at only firms that are listed on the US stock exchange. And there I'm going to try and use equity returns to estimate the impact on expected profits. So we're going to look at firms that get prosecuted by the DOJ or FTC that were listed either in the US on foreign stock exchanges and are prosecuted either in non-merger cases or in criminal cases. So this means that I'm excluding individuals. So there are many, many individuals that get prosecuted. But they tend to be either owners of small firms or managers of these bigger firms that get prosecuted. I'm excluding firms not listed on the SEC, but that's because I have no way of estimating this for those firms. And I'm excluding also in most of what I'll show you the civil merger cases, because here you might have an impact both on productivity and on market power. So for example, if you have a vertical merger, that might get rid of double marginalization, so therefore there could be a productivity effect. Okay. So this is the history of what this looks like. This is DOJ and FTC activity. The number of listed and non-listed firms, so we are basically bound by the red bars here. That's the firms that we're going to use. And here I have a bit of dip there that we figure out because we are missing some cases. So that's what we spent the last couple of months on, is try to fill in this gap here. And that's why I don't have the final results yet. But that's what this looks like. And you can see that there's a lot of discussion that the antitrust investigations got kind of declined significantly over time. That's not really true. What is true is that this actually, many of this here, you get many criminal cases here. And actually, if you look at that, that's very interesting. So the US Department of Justice, around 2000 here, every time there's a Japanese company that gets caught for violating antitrust law, they always go after the CEO. And there are very few cases of companies for other firms where they do this, but they do it always for Japanese firms.
Maybe the great moderation, everything was so moderate that there is no criminality.
Yeah.
They did drop under Trump.
They did drop under Trump, yeah.
I mean, almost by 50%.
Yeah. This is what the industry composition looks like, and there's sort of a mix over time of firms. So the typical, you have many manufacturing cases, but you also have a lot in services and transportation and so on. Garbage collection seems to be one that's very anti-competitive.
And besides some data in the mid-80s?
Yeah, so here we have some missing stuff we figured out because that wasn't uploaded on the website, so we had to go and find this other publication. That's
the rest is exhaustive.
This here, there should be really zero measurement error. Here, there's a bit in what I'm showing you, and there's a bit here, yeah. But so this here will, the main difference when I get the final version of this is you will see more cases here.
But why not looking just at the price of the good directly?
But the issue is we don't have the price of the good.
I thought that, I mean, at the 4-digit, SIC 4-digit level, you have it. You don't have it at the firm level, but you have it.
You don't, but
you have the price. I mean, if you
yeah.
in an industry, I mean, you might.
The price may not change that much actually, at the end of the day, because that you have that like. Since it's the big firms that tend also to be the more productive ones.
No, but exactly. But I'm saying, I thought that what we care about, I don't know, consumer surplus.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, that's what you want to estimate.
Yeah.
Right? Want to estimate consumer surplus.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. The price is a proxy. It's not ideal, but.
No, I mean, so
Or
I mean, I think it would be interesting to use this to go, one could try and do that. Indeed, I think, I mean, that is one thing we're going to try and do. And actually, what we're also going to try and do is to go back to that whole, if you remember the whole measure of the markup, I'm using the production function estimation. But here, I have an instrument for the thing on the left-hand side, the markup. So I could actually do that reversion the other way. So that's another thing I'm going to try and go back to. Okay, so what we're going to do is that going to look at DOJ of FTC goes after a firm. I have, and now I want to estimate the impact on, I want to try and estimate the expected impact on profits of this here. I'm going to use the stock market data for this here. So what we're going to look at is going to look at abnormal daily stock returns, and we're going to use event study methodology. And the reason why we use event studies is that here, clearly, you don't get, it's not random who gets taken to court by the DOJ. It's the firms that were misbehaving. So that means that the parallel trends assumption is broken. These firms were doing better than they should have done because they were misbehaving. Also, you can't use cross-sectional analysis only here because suppose I have the market for computers and Apple, they were misbehaving. Then when Apple gets taken to court, it's going to impact on its competitors. So you have the treatment of the untreated. So you can't use diff and diff, and you can't use cross-sectional variation. But what you can use, you can use event study, and that's what we're going to do. So this is something that's been used quite a lot in finance literature. So what we're going to do is that we're going to estimate stock returns for a sample prior to one of these investigations here. We're going to estimate the stock return of firm J, some constant, and then it's going to be a loading of pricing factors. And those pricing factors are going to be either specified by the stock return on the market, so that's a market model, or Pharma Friends three-factor model, so this controls for the market, the size, and the value, or Pharma Friends five-factor model that also are weak, robust, and conservative or aggressive investment policies. So we're going to do this on daily data in a sample that is 1 year and 1 month before you get prosecuted up to 1 month before. Then we're going to find these beta hats and the alpha hats here. Then we're going to say, now you get taken to court, and I'm going to now predict in that period after you're taken to court what would be your stock return, and then I'm going to subtract that from what is your realized return, and so this is going to be the abnormal return. And then I'm going to accumulate that over some horizon after you get taken to court. And then I'm going to accumulate that across all the firms. Okay. So it turns out when you do this at the econometrics of this here, you have to be careful with a ton of stuff. And so we control for all of that stuff here. So cross-sectional correlation, so that's because one firm gets treated, it has an impact on other firms. So you need to take that into account. Then there's zero correlation in this here of these abnormal returns. And you have the volatility induced by these when you get taken to court. So we control for all of that stuff. And this is what you get. So over here is what this is for the impact of the typical firm that gets taken to court. The accumulated excess return in a window 5 days before, and then on the first day up to 15 days after. And these are p-values for the hypothesis that there's no impact at these various horizons.
What do you test? Sorry, what is the test assumption here? What do you test what against what?
So it's a test that this number here is 0.
Yeah. Okay. Because that was before.
Yeah. So what and taken in. So this measure here is like the hardest. Like you're controlling for like a ton of stuff, and it's a non-parametric test. Like it's really hard to pass. But you can see, so basically, what we have here is that once you get taken to court, if you get taken to court, you have a non-zero, you get a drop in the stock return.
And only for the non-merger. The non-merger is the non-merger case in court, that's it.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, so for the mergers instead, it's here we get the positive one. So this could be productivity and other stuff that's going on. So this is what we look at. Just
means 1%.
so what this is 1% accumulated abnormal return
Accumulative over what?
over 15 days.
Over 15 days.
But it actually drops on day one, and then it just goes down permanently. So that is the average over all of these cases. Of course, between them, there's a lot of variation. So if I plotted all of them, they would like be a fan of this here. They get weighted here by how uncertain these estimates are, and then averaged out, and these are standard errors around that.
So 1 percentage point.
1 percentage point on average, yeah.
1.5%.
Then you could say, okay, there are all kinds of problems here, and there are. Honestly, I mean, you're mixing up a lot of stuff here, so it's very heroic to do this one estimate. So, for example, it's well known in the US that there was a big change in the implementation of antitrust with a guy called Borg. Borg was Solicitor General of the United States from 73 to 77, and then he was on the Court of Appeals from 82 to 88. And he writes a book in 78 basically saying, listen, implementation of antitrust in the US has been wrong because it's focused on competition. It should look at consumer welfare, exactly as you say. And so that actually has had a big impact on how you implement these laws. So that if you look at the court documents, it's all discussions about the consumer welfare. It's quite interesting, or it's even very sophisticated arguments. There is a famous paper that shows that if you take the judges in these cases here, and you give them an econ course, then they actually change their stance on these cases here. So they start. So if they haven't had any econ, they think a lot about competition. And afterwards, then they think about consumer surplus. This had a large impact. So the question is, did things change before and after Borg here? Another thing is that firms, they actually respond very strategically to this antitrust. So magically, what often happens here is that you get taken to court a few days after you release some very good earnings news about some other stuff. That's something that happens quite often. And then, of course, here we both have civil cases and criminal cases, and they are slightly different, so I could try and eliminate the criminal cases. So this turns out that none of this matters so much. So this is like pre-Borg. Borg is 1978, but it starts having an impact from late 80s. But we get very similar estimates before and after. Maybe a little bit less persistent after later on. If I get rid of those that don't release earnings news, again, it's very similar. I get rid of criminal cases is much the same. So I think this is the first paper that shows any impact of this, for the US at the aggregate level. There's a paper in Europe that look at very small selection of cases that find similar kind of effects, but this is the one using a much bigger data set. And what is unknown at this point is actually, does it do anything to competitors? So that's the next thing you do. So suppose you're a competitor to one of these firms, does it impact on you? So the problem here is that it's very hard to say what is a competitor. So actually DOJ, they published a lot of papers in very good journals saying that you can't use SIC. 3 digits SIC definition is not a market. But it's a question then, what is a market? So what we use is a mix of SIC that we shouldn't, and then from the late 80s onwards, there is another classification from a JP paper by Hoberg and Phillips. So Hoberg and Phillips, what they did was that, I don't know, if SIC, the way you define a market there, SIC 3-digit or 4-digit, what it is not the product you produce, but the way you produced it. Hoberg and Phillips, what they do is that they instead go to the firms that are listed on the stock market and go in and say, Samuel says that he produces this, a mobile phone that does this. And then I go in and read what other firms saying they're doing. And then I try and now look at what are the firms that produce the more similar goods, according to the description of what they do. And they do that using something called an intransitive network. Basically look at some correlation between these words you use. And it turns out this is intransitive, so that's kind of, suppose I produce a mobile phone, that's a substitute to if there was a normal phone, that would be a substitute to that. And it would also be a substitute to a small computer, but a normal phone is not a substitute for a computer. Anyway, so this were from 88. So what we do is that then to go back in time, we use the SIC 3-digit before then, but you can also do it just from 88 onward. And this here is when you use Hoberg and Phillips for that small sample, and this is for the bigger sample. And what we get here when we use Hoberg and Phillips is that first there's not much happens, and then at longer horizons we get positive excess returns.
And the excess return here is for the sum of all competitors?
That's right. So that no. So this is the average over all of, not for the. You can also use the sum, but then we have fewer units. So here we have like 15,000 firms and 18,000 here, and then take those and then average across those, or you can take like the mix of those. You get similar results. And this is what it looks like. So not much happens, and then you get a positive excess return. Okay. So I don't think that, so again, I don't think there's anybody around who ever tried to estimate that. So we find, so I'm kind of happy with this here. It's very noisy.
But also very temporary, no?
Yeah, but this you would, okay, so if you think of, this is using stock market data, no? So of course, the longer I go out here, all kinds of other shocks happen along the way, and this tends to go away, yeah. I mean, it would be nice to get it more persistent than that, but still it is like, I mean, relatively okay.
The other one was persistent.
The other one is more precisely estimated to be persistent. Yeah, there's just the standard error that goes up. Yeah.
But I mean, it could, it could be that these are the, I don't know, just a story could be that these are the existing competitors. I mean, that could be entry.
That's right, but this is within 20 days, so probably.
Oh yeah. No, okay, but maybe let me put it differently.
It could be. I mean, so.
Existence of entry.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I don't know how to think about it.
I think. I mean, so I think we're already updating for that missing part, and we're getting this more precisely estimated now. So I think at the end of the day, when we're done, I hope we'll get something there that is more persistent and more precisely estimated.
But here we expect that the effect on competitors would be different on the depending on the concentration of market.
That's right. Yeah. So that would be something one could look more at, try and disaggregate. Yeah.
Look at more concentrated market. We would expect.
Well, okay. So one thing you can do, you can look at. So remember, I said that it should be the big firms that are misbehaving. That's something I can now easily test. So I can take for each of these firms that get prosecuted, then I compute the firm size distribution in the industry, and then I see where are the prosecuted firms in that firm size distribution. And that should be the big firms only. That's what the IO model would tell you. So that's what I'm showing you here. So this is across revenue. So this is deciles of the revenue distribution. And the treated firms are those that get taken to court. And you can see exactly as you would expect, it's a big firms.
It's competitors along which definition?
So this is like, for each of a treated firm, I look at the competitors. So, I mean, this is almost just 10% all the way, because that, apart from that one firm itself, since these are deciles, then.
The competitors is what? SIC or?
Huh?
Competitors is SIC or the other?
At the competitors in CompuStat. Yeah. So actually, you can test that on the chi-square whether they are the same. Is this distribution here 10% all the way? it's like 0 out to the 34th decimal, I think, that test, yeah. So that is very strongly supported. I think that's interesting. I mean, it's a very simple prediction, but it comes through very, very strongly. And that's not, you might say, okay, that's just because DOJ, they always go after the big firms. That's actually not true. They do go after like corner shops and stuff like that as well.
And plumbers.
And plumbers, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, I didn't think that was the case, but they do. There's quite a lot of cases, yeah. Some plumber somewhere that been not allowing or been pricing differently in 2 different markets, weren't allowed to, or garbage collection that were trying to price out other garbage collectors and stuff. Huh? Oh, pharmaceuticals are the worst. Yeah, pharmaceuticals, there are many cases where they pay, there's some generic drug coming along. So you are making a nice profit on some pharma product. Samuel comes up with a generic competitor. You pay him not to put that on the market. DOJ then go after you, tell you, you can't do that. You have to allow him. You say, fine. 2 years later, same thing again. So there's a lot of that going on there. Okay, so now I want to try and use this as an instrument. So ideally, at this point, I actually want to go to the industry level, but I thought it would make sense first to see, do we get anything at all at the aggregate level? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go back to that, I'm going to use that same VAR as Valerie was using. But now I'm going to use my estimated excess returns average across firms, and for over time, I'm going to use that as the instrument now. Of course, this is like, I mean, there are many heroic assumptions I'm making here. So for example, I'm going to use the inverse of the labor share as the measure of the aggregate markup. I mean, that is heroic. But it's somewhere to start at least. Okay, so the idea of the estimated causal effect is that suppose the markup at the aggregate level is some function of tons of endogenous stuff. Like this is technology, demand shocks, etc. And then there are the exogenous changes here. These exogenous changes you can think of being that are composed of many different components. So it could be like product differentiation, fixed cost. And then there's this one component, the exploitation of market power. That's the one thing I have the instrument for. So for this to work, I need this component down here, the exploitation of market power, to account for enough of the variance of this thing here. If that is the case, then I potentially have something I can use. So I'm going to try and estimate this VAR again. Let me just order the labor share first, but here it doesn't matter the ordering at all. And then I'm going to use this from the DOJ or for the antitrust investigations. I'm going to use that as a proxy, as an instrument for the structural shock to the labor share, under the assumption that it is correlated with that and for control to other shocks. So this is the one thing where if you use mergers, this assumption down here would be broken, because it might be related to productivity and other stuff. And this here will be valid, but only as long as this shock here is important enough. If fixed cost or other stuff dominate the variance, then even if the instrument was valid, it wouldn't be usable. Okay, so my instrument is going to be the dollar value of the excess returns of these antitrust investigations, then deflated. And I could use that either for the firms that get missed, that get taken to court, or for the competitors. For these individual firms here, because of stock market volatility, this is noisy, so I'm going to use the one for the competitors. So I'm going to use the estimated impact on the competitors 10 days out, convert it into a dollar value, and then deflate it. Okay. Okay, so let me show you the results now. So my VAR has, again, the log labor share, log real GDP, consumption, government spending, hours worked, federal funds rate. The quarterly change in the GDP deflator is from 65 up to 2019, so just before COVID. 4 lags, I'm using my instrument now up here for the structural shock to the labor share. Okay, so it turns out it's significant as an instrument. But it is weak. Weak doesn't mean you can't use it, just means you have to do inference the right way. And this is what you get on this, like a ton of different ways of doing inference, but it's basically like the first stage. So this what I'm identifying is a drop in the markup that is like for a couple of years, depending on how the inference I'm going to using is this here. So it's significant for around a year or so. So hopefully when we fill that in, my hope is that I'm going to show you something that's a bit nicer here. Actually, that is already the case, so we updated this. I am getting something that looks a lot nicer now. I'm going to show you from this here. And this is what I get now. So this here, I'm showing you the impact of a 1 percentage point drop in the labor share or in the markup. And so what we find now when we use the instrument is that market power goes down, stimulates the economy, and it's actually quite persistent. It stimulates for something like 4 to 5 years. It leads to a rise in aggregate consumption and stimulus of the labor market. And now I find that it's deflationary. And maybe there's a bit of response to monetary policy to it too, but you would expect that given the decline in inflation. So this probably looks like what one would expect.
Yeah, exactly.
It turns out it also is now related to an increase in aggregate investment, but not in R&D. So if this is right, extra market power doesn't seem to be the big culprit in terms of accounting for changes in long-run growth.
Well, it's exactly what the book of this French macroeconomist in the US,
Philippon?
Yeah, Philippon says about
Yeah.
the Trump period, R&D investment and.
Yeah, I must admit, I tried really hard to get something that would give anybody just can't get anything at all on R&D. Labor productivity, I get something. The real wage turns out is also really hard to get anything, but maybe it's just because the standard error is really, really large. But it sort of looked like what you would expect now. Okay. Last thing, you could also, now I actually have an estimate of this shock here to the markup that comes from the market power. So you could look at, like, when has this been going up and down? So let me show you the structural shock I get now. And this is what, here I did a bit of moving average of it, but this is what it looks like. So it looks like, so here I turned it around, so, and when this is positive, it's an increase in market power. So it does look like something is happening here around Trump here. There's something here in the late 80s and early 90s. Here there's a drop around here. So it does seem to tell some story about when our market power has been going up and down. Yeah. I mean, I could compute the counterfactual, what it would have looked like if this was the only shock. But there does seem to be something going on there. Okay. But the paper is not quite done yet because we're filling in that missing hole there. But this is what we've done. So try to estimate the impact on market power using this antitrust. And we focus here on granular firms. I should point out there's another paper that uses antitrust, but they focus on the small firms instead. So looking only at firms that are local, what happens then? And they use diff and diff. But we think that focusing on the granular firms, which is what happens because we look at both because we're looking at CompuStat, and then, as I showed you, it's the big firms within CompuStat that gets prosecuted. Then we sort of think that gets a more reasonable variation out of that, yeah. So what we find at the aggregate level here is that we find an instrument that is valid, weak at this point here. Hopefully it's going to be stronger when we fill things in. And we find that the rising market power that depresses the economy. That's a key result that comes out of this. Yeah.
One of the naive questions. So
Yeah.
the production of the films, they're all consumption goods, or are there some intermediary goods?
They're all in here. There are also capital goods for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think intermediate goods there are some, but not so many. Yeah.
Very much, Morten.
Yeah.